Jake was just an ordinary man working as a human diplomat on the edge of the galaxy. He'd spent most of his life on Earth studying peace treaties, learning about alien cultures, and helping with negotiations between humans and other species. The Galaxy Council had chosen him for this important meeting. A meeting that could change the future of human and alien relations. The Galactic Alliance had invited Earth to join their council, and Jake was the one selected to represent his people. He was nervous, but he tried not to show it. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. The other races of the galaxy were powerful and ancient, and humans were still considered newcomers. But Earth's potential was undeniable. The council wanted to include them. The room was large, filled with representatives of many alien species. Some were tall with glowing blue skin, while others were shorter, their skin covered in scales. The air was thick with the smell of foreign spices and perfumes. Jake adjusted his uniform and stood at the center. Waiting for the meeting to begin, the doors opened and the room grew silent. Princess Lyra entered, flanked by 2 guards. Was the leader of the Zorvian Empire, a powerful and ancient race that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. She had a regal presence with silver hair that flowed down to her shoulders and violet eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Her skin was pale, almost ethereal, and her long dress shimmered like liquid silver. Every being in the room stood. Taller at the sight of her, Jake was struck by her beauty. But there was something more, a mysterious energy about her that he couldn't explain. He'd heard stories about her, of course. Princess Lyra was a fierce leader, known for her wisdom and power. But there was something else, something that made people afraid to look her in the eyes for too long. The meeting began, and representatives from various species spoke about the state of the galaxy, trade agreements, and defense strategies. But Jake's mind wasn't on the discussions. Couldn't stop thinking about Lyra. He had studied her before the meeting, but seeing her in person was different. She was more than he had imagined. Finally, it was time for introductions. The representatives from each race stepped forward. Jake felt his heart race. When it was his turn, he stepped up, trying to keep his composure. "Jake Miller, representing Earth," he said, giving a respectful bow. He extended his hand to Lyra. She looked at him for a moment, her violet eyes piercing into his, and slowly she reached out and shook his hand. In that moment, something strange happened. Lyra's hand trembled slightly, almost imperceptibly. Jake felt it too. A sudden chill ran up his arm, and he wondered if he had imagined it. Her hand pulled away quickly, and she stepped back with a slight frown. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Jake's mind raced, trying to understand what had just happened. Was it nervousness? Was it the weight of the moment? Or was it something else entirely? Lyra's eyes flickered toward her guards, who seemed to be just as confused. The room grew thick. Jake glanced around the room, but no one spoke. It was as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath. But then Lyra composed herself. She smiled at him, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome. Earthling," she said, her voice smooth and melodic. "We are honored to have you join the Galactic Alliance." Her words seemed polite, but there was a hint of something. More behind them? Was she uncomfortable? Was she hiding something? Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a simple greeting. The meeting continued, but Jake couldn't focus on the discussions. His mind kept returning to that brief moment when their hands touched. He felt her tremble, and he didn't understand why. Was it because of him, or was it something about humans that she feared? When the meeting ended, Jake couldn't get the image of Lyra's trembling hand out of his mind. He walked back to his quarters on the space station, his thoughts clouded. With questions? Why had she trembled? Was it just nerves, or was there something deeper going on? He had never heard of anyone making the princess of the Zorvian Empire tremble before. Lyra was known for her strength, her control over her emotions, and her fierce leadership. Yet, in that brief moment, she had shown a vulnerability he hadn't expected. As he lay in bed that night, Jake couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, replaying the scene in his mind over and over again. He had to know why she had reacted that way. It didn't make sense, and he wasn't one to ignore his instincts. There was more to this than a simple handshake. The next morning, Jake decided to act on his feelings. He would speak to Lyra. He needed to understand what had happened. He made his way to the royal chambers, where Lyra was preparing for another meeting. Her guards stood at attention, but they stepped aside when they saw Jake approach. Lyra was sitting at a desk, looking over documents. She glanced up as Jake entered, her violet eyes narrowing slightly. There was no hint of the discomfort she had shown the day before. She was calm, composed, and as regal as ever. "Jake," she greeted him coolly. "What brings you here?" "I just wanted to talk," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady, "about yesterday." Her eyes flickered with something. Was it surprise or concern? "There's nothing to discuss," Lyra said, her tone polite but firm. "The meeting went as planned. There's no need for further conversation." But Jake wasn't ready to let it go. "I felt something," he said, his voice softer. "When we shook hands, you trembled. I want to understand why." Lyra's eyes flashed, and for a moment Jake thought she might push him out of the room. But then she sighed and leaned back in her chair. "It's not something you need to worry about," she said quietly. "I am not used to human contact." Jake's heart skipped a beat. Was she admitting something personal? "Didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said, his voice gentle. "I just don't understand." Lyra paused, her expression softening for a brief moment. She met his gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Perhaps one day." "You will," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The next few days were strange for Jake. His mind kept returning to that moment with Lyra. The trembling of her hand when they shook hands had been brief, but the memory lingered. He had never imagined that a simple greeting could carry so much weight. But there was something about Lyris, something beyond her beauty and power, that made Jake want to understand her more. The days after the meeting, Jake worked hard, attending diplomatic events and learning about the different species within the Galactic Alliance. He knew he had to keep his focus, especially since his mission was important for Earth's future. But every time he passed by Lyra's chambers or caught a glimpse of her, his heart would race. He couldn't help it. He was drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain. One afternoon, Jake found himself sitting alone in the garden of the space station. It was a quiet place, away from the hustle and bustle of the meetings. The air smelled fresh, almost like a mix of Earth's spring flowers and the spices of alien plants. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, trying to clear his mind. But even here, in this peaceful setting, his thoughts returned to Lyra. He wondered if she felt the same way. Could it be that she had felt a connection, just like he had? Or was it simply a reaction to something else, something he didn't understand? As he sat in the garden, lost in his thoughts, he was surprised to see a familiar figure approaching. It was Lyra. She walked gracefully, her silver hair catching the sunlight as she moved. She wore a simple outfit today, not her royal gown, but still carrying herself with the same dignity. She didn't seem to notice Jake at first, but as she passed by, their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with unspoken words. Jake wasn't sure what to say. But Lyra broke the silence. "I've been meaning to speak with you," she said, her voice soft but strong. "If you have time." Jake nodded, surprised but pleased. "Of course I'm always available." Lyra glanced around, making sure no one was close. Then, with a small gesture, she motioned for Jake to follow her. He got up and walked beside her as she led him to a more private area, deep in the garden, where the plants were thick, and the sounds of the space station faded away. "I know. You must have many questions," Lyra said, as they stopped in a quiet corner. She stood still for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. Her eyes seemed distant, and Jake could tell she was struggling with something. Jake took a step forward, his curiosity growing. "About the meeting. What happened between us?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, about that." She paused again, as if trying to find the right words. "I owe you an explanation." Jake waited, his heart beating faster. He had never seen Lyra like this before. The strong, confident princess seemed vulnerable, almost fragile. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded, encouraging her to continue. I've lived my life with a deep sense of responsibility, Lyra began. As the ruler of the Zorvian Empire, I've always had to control my emotions, my actions, my very being. I've never allowed myself to show weakness. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, Jake saw something in them, something that made him feel as though she was revealing more than just words. But when we touched, we shook hands, something inside me changed. Jake was quiet for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. He had guessed that Lyra was not an ordinary princess, but hearing her speak like this made him realize just how much she was carrying. The weight of an entire empire, the burden of expectations, and now, the pressure of a prophecy that she couldn't escape. I didn't expect that reaction. Lyra continued, her voice barely above. Whisper. Not from you, and certainly not from myself. Zorvian culture doesn't allow for such openness, for showing weakness. She looked down at her hands for a moment, as if ashamed of her vulnerability. When I shook your hand, I felt something I haven't felt before, something warm, something that scared me. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Warm, scared. He had never thought of himself as someone who could make a powerful alien princess feel that way. But somehow, in that simple gesture, they had shared something deeper than he had realized. I don't understand, Jake said softly, his voice laced with curiosity. What do you mean by warmth? What scared you about it? Lyra met his gaze again, and this time there was no hesitation in her eyes. You are different from anyone I have met, Jake, she said. Humans are not like us. Your people are young, still discovering their place in the galaxy, but there is something in you. What? Something that made me feel a connection I cannot explain. Jake's mind raced. He had never thought of himself as special, just a simple human diplomat trying to do his job. But now, hearing Lyra's words, he began to wonder if there was more to this than just an accidental meeting. Was there something in humans that the other species didn't understand? Something that Lyra could see, but others could not? Before he could ask more, Lyra took a step back, her expression hardening once again. But I cannot allow myself to be distracted, she said firmly. I have responsibilities. Zorvian Empire must come first. We are at a delicate moment in our history. I cannot let my emotions guide me. Jake nodded, understanding. He had seen how powerful Lyra was, how she carried the weight of her people on her shoulders. It was clear that her feelings were in conflict with her duty. I understand, he said quietly. But maybe, sometimes, you don't have to carry everything alone. Lyra looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Perhaps, she said, her voice softening. But for now we must focus on what is ahead. The future of the galaxy may depend on it. As they stood there, the garden around them was silent, as if listening to their conversation. For a brief moment, Jake felt as though he and Lyra were the only two people in the universe. In that silence, he understood something deeper, something that would change his future and the fate of the galaxy forever. The days following Jake's conversation with Lyra were quiet, but his mind was anything but calm. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she had looked at him when she spoke of feeling a connection. He wasn't sure what that meant, but it felt important. Something was happening between them, something beyond simple diplomacy. Jake tried to focus on his duties. He attended meetings, exchanged reports, and continued to study the cultures of the other species in the galactic alliance. But nothing seemed to matter as much as the princess. Each time he saw her, whether across a room or during a formal event, he felt a pull. He had to remind himself that she was a leader, far above his station, and that their roles were different. He was just a human diplomat, and she was the ruler of the Zorvian Empire. Still, when they passed each other in the corridors, their eyes would meet. Lyra's expression remained neutral, but Jake could see the flicker of something behind her calm exterior. She had been distant ever since their conversation, but Jake didn't hold it against her. He understood that she had responsibilities. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and leaders like Lyra had to stay strong. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Jake decided to take a walk through the space station's observation deck. The stars outside were stunning, stretching in every direction like tiny diamonds, scattered across a vast, endless sky. Jake leaned against the railing, gazing out at the stars, lost in thought. "You're still here?" "Ing." Jake turned around at the sound of the voice. It was Lyra, standing at the entrance of the deck. Her face was illuminated by the soft glow of the lights from the station. She looked as regal as ever, but her eyes were softer tonight. She walked toward him, her footsteps quiet against the metallic floor. "I couldn't sleep," Jake said. With a slight smile, "The stars are a little distracting." Lyra nodded, her gaze shifting to the stars as well. "They remind me of home," she said, her voice carrying a trace of sadness. "My people once ruled the galaxy. We thought we would always control everything. But now we are just one of many." Jake didn't know what to say to that. He could see that Lyra was conflicted, torn between the history of her empire and the future that was being shaped by the new alliances. He could feel the weight of her words, even if she didn't show it. She was strong, but Jake could see the cracks in her armor. "You're not just one of many," Jake said, his voice sincere. "The Zorvian Empire is powerful. And you're one of the most respected leaders in the galaxy. You've earned that respect." Lyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Respect is easy to lose," she replied softly. "My people need me. But sometimes, I wonder if I am doing the right thing." Jake frowned, sensing her inner turmoil. He wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but he didn't know how. He had always been good with words, but this was different. This wasn't about diplomacy or peace treaties. This was about Lyra's fears and her struggles. "You're doing what you think is best," Jake said quietly. "And that's all anyone can do." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, her violet eyes searching his face. Then she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I don't know what's best anymore," she admitted. "Everything feels uncertain. I am the princess. But sometimes I wish I could just be normal, to not have to make decisions that affect the fate of an entire empire." Jake stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. Couldn't help it, seeing Lyra so vulnerable. So unsure, made him want to protect her. He had always been someone who wanted to help, to fix things. But with Lyra, he wasn't sure how to do that. "You don't have to do it alone," Jake said, his voice low. "I'm here. We're all here to help you." Lyra blinked, her lips parting as if she were about to say something. But instead she closed her mouth, her eyes softening. For a moment, she looked like she might step forward, but then she took a step back, pulling away. "I cannot be distracted, Jake," she said, her voice firm once again. "The galaxy is at a crossroads. The Zorvian Empire needs a strong leader. It needs me to be unwavering. I cannot let anything get in the way of that." Jake nodded slowly, understanding. He knew that Lyra's duty was her priority, and he respected that. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were connected in some way, something beyond duty, beyond the roles they played. It was a feeling he couldn't explain, but it was there, pulling at him. "I understand," Jake said. "Softly, I won't distract you. Just remember, you don't have to do everything alone." Lyra met his gaze, her eyes searching his face once more. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Jake could feel the electricity in the air, the unspoken words between them. But then Lyra turned away, her shoulders stiffening as she stepped toward the exit. "Thank you, Jake," she said, her voice quiet. "But I must return to my duties." Jake watched as she left, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty room. He stood there for a long time, staring at the stars. He didn't know what would happen between him and Lyra. He didn't know if she would ever be able to let go of her fears and her responsibilities long enough to let anyone in. But one thing was certain: he couldn't stop thinking about her. And deep down, he felt that their connection was far from over. Jake felt a quiet tension in the air as he continued his duties. After his conversation with Lyra, things seemed to have changed between them, but not in the way he had hoped. She was still distant, still focused on her responsibilities. Couldn't blame her. The weight of her empire rested on her shoulders, and that was no small burden. But Jake had learned something important. Lyra was more than just a princess. She was a leader, a warrior, and someone who carried more pain and fear than anyone could see. Every time he saw her, he noticed something different, a look in her eyes that spoke of loneliness, of struggle. And though she tried to keep her distance, Jake felt a pull toward her that he couldn't ignore. He spent the next few days trying to keep his mind on his mission. He attended meetings with the Galactic Council, helped organize trade talks, and worked alongside diplomats from various species. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't escape thoughts of Lyra. He was drawn to her, and that feeling only grew stronger. One evening, Jake was in the space station's common area, reading through reports when he was interrupted by a voice. "Jake, can we talk?" He looked up and saw Lyra standing in the doorway. She wasn't wearing her royal attire this time, just a simple outfit that made her look less like a princess and more like an ordinary person. Her violet eyes were softer than usual, but there was still something guarded about her. Jake put down the reports, his heart racing. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Lyra stepped into the room, her gaze flickering nervously. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day," she began. "About not doing everything alone." Jake nodded, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "You don't have to carry everything by yourself, Lyra. You've got allies, and you don't have to face everything alone." Lyra smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's not that simple, Jake. I have a duty to my people, to my empire. If I show weakness, if I let my guard down, what does that make me? A ruler who's afraid of the responsibility. I can't be that. I can't allow myself to be that." Jake stood up from his chair, walking over to her. He could see the pain in her expression, the fear she tried to hide behind her strength. He knew it wasn't just about the empire. It was about her, too. She was scared of trusting anyone, even him. "You don't have to be perfect, Lyra," Jake said gently. "You don't have to be a stone wall all the time. You're allowed to feel, to be vulnerable. You don't have to carry everything by yourself." Lyra looked away, her hands tightening into fists. "I've always been strong, Jake. My people need me to be strong. I can't afford to be weak." Jake stepped closer, his voice low. "But strength doesn't mean you have to do everything alone. It means knowing when to lean on others. And you can lean on me, Lyra. You don't have to carry it all by yourself." For a moment, there was silence between them. Lyra didn't speak, and Jake wasn't sure if she was even listening. But he could see the tears welling up in her eyes, threatening to break free. The princess, the warrior, the ruler, was she, finally letting her walls come down. "I don't know how to do that," Lyra whispered. "I don't know how to let go. To trust someone enough to share this burden." Jake placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the tension in her body. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one step at a time. I'm here for you, Lyra, and I'm not going anywhere." She finally looked at him, and for the first time, Jake saw the vulnerability in her eyes. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. "I don't know if I'm ready," Lyra said quietly, "but I'm willing to try." Jake gave her a small smile, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "You don't have to be ready, right? Away. We'll take it slow. Together." They stood there for a moment, both lost in their thoughts. For the first time in a long while, Jake felt like they were on the same page. There was still a lot of uncertainty ahead, but he could feel a shift between them. Lyra was starting to open up, and that was a victory in itself. The next few days passed with a new sense of understanding between them. They spoke more often, whether it was about the galaxy's politics or just about their lives. Lyra shared more of her thoughts, her fears, and Jake found himself doing the same. It wasn't easy for her, but she was trying. Jake's feelings for Lyra were becoming more complicated with every passing day. He was drawn to her, not just for her beauty or her position, but for who she was, someone who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders and was afraid of letting anyone close. She wasn't just a princess. She was a person with struggles and doubts just like him. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Jake found himself alone in the observation deck again. The stars outside were as beautiful as ever, their soft light casting a calm glow over the station. He wasn't surprised when he heard footsteps behind him. "I couldn't sleep again," Lyra said softly, appearing at his side. She had changed into something more comfortable, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked tired, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Jake nodded, his heart beating a little faster. "It's hard to sleep when you have a lot on your mind." Lyra smiled faintly, then stepped closer to the railing, her gaze following his to the stars. "I'm starting to understand what you meant," she said quietly, "about not doing everything alone. It's difficult, but I think I'm starting to trust you." Jake felt a warmth in his chest at her words. Trust. It was a small step, but it was the first one. "I'm glad to hear that," Jake replied, his voice sincere. "And I'm here for you, no matter what." For a moment, the two of them stood side by side, watching the stars in silence. It was a peaceful moment, one that spoke of possibilities and the hope that, together, they could face whatever the future held. Jake could feel the tension building as the days passed. The alliance between the humans and the Zorvian Empire had become stronger, and Jake had worked hard to ensure that Earth was seen as a reliable partner. But something inside him still longed for answers. Lyra's words about trust had opened a new chapter in their relationship, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their connection than either of them understood. The more time they spent together, Jake learned about Lyra's fears and doubts. He'd always known she was a powerful leader, but he was beginning to see the other side of her. The side that was afraid to let anyone close. The side that questioned whether she was truly fit to lead her people. But despite everything, Lyra was trying. She was opening up, little by little, and Jake could see the changes in her. Her guards still stood close by during meetings, and her role as the princess never faltered. But in their private moments, he could see the softening in her eyes. She was no longer just the cold, distant leader she had once been. She was starting to let him in. One afternoon, Jake found himself once again in the space station's garden. The plants were lush and colorful, a rare sight in the vastness of space. He loved spending time here, away from the political discussions and the constant rush of the station. It gave him a chance to clear his mind, to think without distractions. As he walked along the winding path, his thoughts returned to Lyra. She had been distant again over the past few days, as if she was struggling with something deep inside. Jake couldn't help but wonder if their growing connection was becoming too much for her to handle. Just as he was lost in thought, a familiar voice called out to him, "Jake." He turned and saw Lyra standing by a small fountain. Her eyes were focused on him, but there was something in her gaze that made him feel uneasy. She looked like she had something important to say. He walked toward her, his heart beating a little faster. "Lyra, is everything okay?" Lyra nodded, but the faint tension in her shoulders gave her away. "I need to talk to you," she said. Quietly, her voice serious. "There's something I haven't told you." Jake felt his stomach tighten. Was she going to push him away again? Or was this about something else? "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lyra took a deep breath, her eyes flickering to the ground before meeting his again. "I've been hiding something," she said softly. "It's not just about the prophecy or my duties. It's something personal." Jake listened intently, his heart racing. Whatever it was, he could tell it had been weighing on her for a long time. She had been carrying this secret alone, and now she was finally ready to share it. "I was born into a world of expectations," Lyra began. "As a child, I was trained to rule, to lead. I never had the chance to make my own choices, to decide who I wanted to be. The Zorvian Empire has always been at war, always fighting for power, and I was expected to be the one to bring peace." Pause for a moment, her expression distant, as if she were reliving the past. "But I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. I've always felt like I was living in someone else's shadow. My father's shadow, his legacy. The weight of his actions has haunted me for years." Jake felt a deep sympathy for Lyra. He had seen her strength, her determination to lead her people, but now he understood how much of that was built on fear. Fear of failing, fear of not living up to the expectations placed on her. "You're not alone in this." "Lyra," Jake said gently, stepping closer. No, you don't have to carry the weight of your father's legacy by yourself. Lyra shook her head. I don't know how to do that, Jake. I've always been taught that I must be perfect, that I must carry this burden without faltering. But the truth is, I'm scared. I'm scared of failing my people. I'm scared of letting them down. Jake could see the vulnerability in her eyes now. It was the first time she had opened up so completely, and it made him realize just how much she had been holding back. She wasn't just the princess of the Zorvian Empire. She was a woman struggling with the weight of her own identity, unsure of where her path would lead. You're not failing, Lyra, Jake said, his voice full of conviction. You're doing the best you can. That's all anyone can ask for. Your people respect you, not because of your father's legacy, but because of who you are. Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But what if I'm not enough? Jake reached out, gently taking her hand in his. You are enough, Lyra. You're more than enough. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself. For a moment, Lyra didn't speak. She just stood there, holding his hand as if weighing his words. Then, slowly, she squeezed his hand. A small but significant gesture. Thank you, Jake, she whispered, her voice full of emotion. I don't know what I would do without you. Jake smiled softly, his heart warming at her words. You don't have to worry about that. I'm not going anywhere. They stood there together for a while, the sounds of the fountain and the soft rustling of the leaves creating a peaceful atmosphere. It was a moment of quiet understanding, a moment where the weight of the galaxy seemed to fade away. And they were just two people, connected in a way they had never been before. As the evening grew darker, Lyra looked up at the stars. I'm still not sure about everything, Jake, she said softly, but I'm starting to understand. I'm starting to believe that maybe I don't have to do this alone. Jake nodded. You don't, Lyra? You don't have to do anything. Alone, for the first time in a long time, Lyra smiled a real smile, one that reached her eyes. And in that smile, Jake saw hope. Hope for the future and hope for them. The following weeks were filled with tension and uncertainty as the Zorvian Empire prepared for the inevitable war. The Varkan threat had grown larger and more dangerous, and the Galactic Alliance was struggling to find a solution. The pressure on Lyra had only increased, and Jake could see the weight of it in her eyes every time they spoke. Despite everything, they had continued to spend time together. Every meeting, every conversation seemed to bring them closer. Lyra was still the princess, still the leader of an empire, but she had begun to trust Jake more than she ever had anyone before. And in return, Jake found himself more invested in her struggles, more determined to help her. One evening, as they sat in a private chamber, going over plans to counter the Varkan attacks, Lyra seemed distant, her mind clearly elsewhere. Jake watched her for a moment, noticing the way her fingers nervously tapped against the table. Lyra, Jake said softly, are you okay? She looked up at him, her violet eyes clouded with doubt. I don't know anymore, Jake, she admitted quietly. The more I think about it, the more I realize I may not be the right person to lead my people through this. The Varkans are ruthless, and we are not prepared for what's coming. I've led my people into war before, but this feels different. It feels like we're outmatched. Jake stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You're not alone in this, Lyra. The Alliance will stand with you. You will all fight together. You've led your people through tough times before, and you can do it again. Lyra gave him a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. You don't understand, Jake. It's not just about the war. It's about me. I've never been the ruler I was meant to be. I've spent my entire life running from my destiny, hiding behind my responsibilities. I don't even know if I can trust myself anymore. Jake's heart ached for her. He had seen the strength she carried, the burden she had been forced to bear, and yet he could also see the cracks in her armor, the doubts that weighed her down. You've been carrying this burden alone for so long, Jake said gently, but you don't have to anymore. I'm here for you, not just a diplomat. I'm your ally, your friend, and I believe in you. Lyra turned her face to look at him, her eyes softening for the first time in what felt like weeks. Thank you, Jake, she whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you. Smiled and squeezed her shoulder. You don't have to worry about that. I'm not going anywhere.
Hey.
For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air. But then, Lyra took a deep breath and straightened up, her usual composure returning. We have to prepare, she said, her voice firm. You have to be ready for the Varkans. The galaxy depends on it. Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The Alliance needed to be united, and Lyra's leadership was crucial. He had no doubt that she would rise to the challenge. But he also knew that she needed support, not just as a leader, but as a person. The next few days were filled with strategy sessions and preparations for the coming war. Jake spent long hours working alongside the Zorvian military, learning their tactics and helping to coordinate the Alliance's forces. It was exhausting work, but Jake found a sense of purpose in it. He wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He was part of something bigger. One evening, as the sun set over the distant planets, Jake found himself standing in the observation deck, gazing out at the stars. The sky was breathtaking, a deep shade of purple as the first stars began to twinkle. In the distance, it was hard to believe that the galaxy was on the brink of war. It felt almost impossible that such beauty could exist in the same world that held so much violence and fear. You're still up, or his voice broke through. His thoughts, Jake turned to find her standing behind him, a soft smile on her lips. She had been working nonstop for days, yet there she was, taking a moment to breathe. I couldn't sleep, Jake replied. The stars helped clear my head. Lyra nodded and stepped closer to him, looking out at the stars with him. Remind me of the old days, she said softly. Before the wars, before everything changed. There was a time when our empire was at peace, when we didn't have to worry about threats like the Varkans. Jake glanced at her, sensing the sadness. In her voice, do you ever miss it? The peace? Lyra was quiet for a long moment before she spoke. I miss it more than you can imagine, but I can't go back. The galaxy has changed, and I have to change with it. Jake turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers. You're doing the best you can, Lyra. No one expects you to be. Perfect. You're a leader, yes, but you're also a person, and you deserve peace too. She looked at him, her violet eyes filled with gratitude. I'm starting to realize that, she said quietly, but it's hard to accept. I've always been told that I have to be strong, that I have to be the one to carry the weight of everything. But now, I'm beginning to understand that maybe I don't have to do it alone. Jake stepped closer, his voice low. You don't, Lyra. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here with you, no matter what happens. Lyra gave him a soft, almost imperceptible nod, and for the first time in a long time, Jake saw a glimmer of peace in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough for him to know that Lyra was no longer completely alone in her struggle. They had become more than allies. They had become something that neither of them had expected, as they stood together. Watching the stars above, Jake realized that the path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and challenges. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. They had come this far, and together they could face whatever was to come.